The world is out of control, and the only way to fix it is through revolution by any means necessary. If you're intrigued by this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support more in-depth investigations into history's most mysterious figures. The early years, a gifted but isolated child, Ted Kaczynski was born in 1942 in Chicago. A brilliant child with an IQ of 168, he was pushed by his parents to excel in everything he did. Yet, something was always missing. His world was filled with books and a passion for the outdoors, but the connections he needed to thrive were never there. Harvard, the turning point. A struggle to fit in. At just 16, Ted entered Harvard, a young, gifted student surrounded by wealth and elitism. Here, Ted began to feel the growing distance between himself and the rest of society. His academic brilliance became overshadowed by feelings of alienation, and the pain of being constantly ridiculed by peers would mark the start of his isolation. The experiment. A dark turn in Ted's life. Ted's story took a dark turn when he became a part of an unethical CIA-funded psychological experiment at Harvard. Dr. Henry Murray, a prominent psychologist, subjected Ted to harsh interrogations, pushing him to the brink of madness. Little did Ted know this would leave lasting scars. The struggle within, a growing hatred for society. After years of psychological torment, Ted began questioning everything. He grew increasingly angry at the world, believing that technology and industrial society were robbing humanity of its freedom. The more he thought, the more he became obsessed with the idea of dismantling the system that in his mind was the source of all suffering. The escape to Montana, seeking solitude and revenge. In 1969, Ted left his promising academic career at UC Berkeley behind. He moved to a remote cabin in the Montana wilderness, seeking solitude away from society. Here he could live off the land, away from the modern world he despised. Yet even in isolation, his mind was already turning dark thoughts into dangerous plans. The first bomb, the beginning of a violent campaign. Ted began meticulously crafting bombs in his tiny cabin. Each one was more refined than the last. He believed his actions would bring attention to the destruction caused by technology, and the first bomb marked the beginning of a campaign that would terrorize the nation for nearly 2 decades. The fear spreads America in terror. As Ted's bombs began to take lives and cause destruction, the media started calling him the Unabomber, an anonymous figure who struck fear into the hearts of everyday Americans. The bombs were sophisticated, precise, and left no clues behind. The FBI had no leads, and the country was in a state of terror. The manifesto begins, crafting a dangerous philosophy. In the quiet of his cabin, Ted began writing his manifesto. A detailed and passionate argument against the industrial technological system took shape. He wasn't just building bombs, he was building a philosophy that would explain why he did what he did. His manifesto would eventually become his legacy, a chilling glimpse into his mind. The silence of years. Ted's plans for the future. For 5 years, Ted's bombing spree stopped. The FBI was no closer to catching him, and the nation began to breathe a little easier. But in the silence, Ted wasn't idle. He refined his methods and prepared for his return, knowing that his next act would be even more explosive than the last. The 1993 comeback, resuming his terror campaign. In 1993, after a long hiatus, Ted struck again. 2 prominent researchers received bombs in the mail. The devastation was immediate, and soon after, Ted sent a letter to the New York Times claiming credit and warning the public of more attacks to come. The terror had returned, and it was only a matter of time before the FBI would be forced to confront him. The FBI's desperation, an investigation that can't catch him. The FBI had no real leads. Despite their efforts, they could not connect the dots between the bombings. The investigation had become a massive, costly manhunt. But Ted, ever the genius, stayed one step ahead. His bombs were almost flawless, and the people behind the attacks remained elusive. The media frenzy, the Unabomber's growing infamy, the public's obsession with the Unabomber reached new heights. News stations covered every new bombing, and rumors about his identity ran wild. The media was hungry for information, but Ted's true identity remained a mystery. The only thing certain was the fear he spread across the nation. The breakthrough, a sketch of the suspect. In 1987, a breakthrough came. Ted's face, or rather a sketch of him wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, surfaced. A woman had spotted him near a bomb site in Salt Lake City. The FBI now had a description of the bomber, but the breakthrough would soon be overshadowed by the sheer complexity of his operations. The hiatus, a 5-year pause in the attacks. For 5 long years, Ted disappeared. The bombings stopped. The FBI pursued thousands of dead ends, but Ted remained elusive. It was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. Little did they know he was still planning his next strike. Would be devastating. Ted's philosophy, the anti-technology beliefs behind his actions. Ted was more than a criminal. He was a man with a deeply held belief that technology was destroying humanity. His manifesto, which he began writing during his time in Montana, would eventually become the document that explained his twisted logic. But it wasn't just about technology. It was about revenge. Revenge against a system he believed had ruined the world. The FBI's growing pressure. The hunt continues. As the years passed, the pressure on the FBI grew. The Unabomber remained a shadow in the public consciousness, a symbol of fear and an enigma that the Bureau could not crack. They were no closer to finding him. But the FBI knew that eventually Ted would slip up. Ted's return. A more sophisticated approach to terror. In 1993, Ted resumed his campaign of terror. His bombs were more sophisticated and his targets more strategic. But now his goal was clearer. He wanted attention. He wanted the world to know his philosophy, and he was willing to kill to get it. The manifesto's demands, the Unabomber's bold request. In a bold move, Ted made his demands known. He wanted the New York Times to publish his manifesto, or he would continue his attacks. The FBI was caught in a moral dilemma. Should they publish the manifesto and risk encouraging him, or should they ignore him and continue the manhunt? The decision: should the manifesto be published? After much debate, the New York Times agreed to publish Ted's manifesto. The world would finally know his thoughts, his beliefs, and his reasoning behind the bombings. But in doing so, the FBI faced a new challenge: how to catch him now that his words were out in the open. The identification, a brother's realization. It didn't take long for Ted's brother David to read the manifesto. As he read, he was struck by the uncanny similarities to Ted's views, and the writing style was unmistakably familiar. The chilling realization hit him. Ted was the Unabomber, and he knew what he had to do next. The call to the FBI. A betrayal for the greater good. David knew what he had to do. He contacted the FBI, sharing his suspicions about his brother. It was a betrayal that would tear his family apart, but it was the only way to stop the violence. With this tip, the FBI finally had the break they needed. The sting: the FBI sets its sights on Ted's cabin. The FBI moved quickly, setting up surveillance around Ted's remote cabin. It was a quiet operation, but as whispers of suspicion spread around town, the pressure mounted. Ted had no idea he was being watched, and the FBI was closing in on him. The discovery journals and evidence that link Ted to the bombings. One day, as Ted was working in his cabin, the FBI made their move. They found his journals, meticulously documenting his crimes and thoughts. In those pages, Ted's dark philosophy came to light in horrifying detail. The FBI had the evidence they needed to arrest him. The arrest: Ted Kaczynski's capture. In April 1996, the FBI finally took Ted Kaczynski into custody. He was caught not through the brilliance of their investigation, but because his brother had made the crucial call. Ted's cabin, once a symbol of his rebellion, was now the site of his downfall. The trial. Ted faces justice for his crimes. Ted's trial was a media spectacle. He was charged with the murders of 3 people and the injury of over 20 others. Throughout the trial, Ted remained steadfast, refusing to plead insanity. He wanted the world to know that his actions were driven by his beliefs, not by madness. The sentence, a life sentence, without parole. In the end, Ted pleaded guilty to his crimes to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Despite the severity of his actions, Ted seemed almost relieved to finally face the consequences of his life's work. Behind bars, Ted continues his writing and correspondence. While in prison, Ted continued to write, sharing his ideas with anyone who would listen. He corresponded with journalists, scholars, and even admirers who were drawn to his anti-technology philosophy. Despite his crimes, some still found his ideas compelling. The friendships formed Ted's connection with Timothy McVeigh. Ted made a surprising connection in prison with Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. The 2 men shared similar views, and though McVeigh would eventually be executed, Ted found an unlikely camaraderie with him in their shared anger toward modern society. The love letters. Ted finds unexpected romantic attention. Ted's prison life also brought him something he had never had before: romantic attention. Dozens of women began writing to him, and eventually one captured his heart. Their relationship remained purely through letters and visits, but for Ted it was the closest he would ever come to love. The final days. Ted's decline and death. As Ted aged, he continued to write publishing books and maintaining a correspondence with his followers. But in 23, Ted's health began to deteriorate. He was diagnosed with cancer, and shortly after he took his own life at the age of 81. Leaving behind a complex legacy that still fascinates and terrifies. The legacy of Ted Kaczynski, a complex and controversial figure. Ted Kaczynski's legacy is complex. While his bombings left a trail of pain and destruction, his manifesto continues to resonate with some who are disillusioned by modern technological society. His warnings about the dangers of unchecked industrialism still echo in debates about the future of technology. The manifesto's influence. A prophetic call or mad rant. Kaczynski's manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, remains a touchstone for those questioning the role of technology in human life. Some see it as a prophetic call to arms, while others dismiss it as the ramblings of a madman. Either way, it's a text that continues to spark discussions. The unlikely admirers. Ted's post-capture. Following. Even after his arrest and imprisonment, Ted gained a following online, particularly among young people frustrated by climate change and societal issues. Kaczynski's critiques of industrial society found a new audience. However, these admirers often overlook the violence that accompanied his ideas. A cautionary tale. The dangers of extreme ideologies. Ted's life serves as a cautionary tale. His genius was overshadowed by his deepening disillusionment, which led to acts of extreme violence. His failure to channel his intelligence into peaceful activism or constructive dialogue demonstrates the dangers of extreme ideologies. The problem of isolation, how alienation led to violence. Ted's descent into violence was fueled by isolation. His belief that society was inherently corrupt led him to withdraw from it entirely. His journey from a brilliant mathematician to a violent recluse highlights the destructive power of social alienation and unchecked frustration. Ted's personal struggles, the deep-rooted issues behind his actions. Despite his outward success, Ted struggled with deep personal issues. His feelings of inadequacy, depression, and anger at society were amplified by his childhood experiences and his time at Harvard. These internal battles shaped his views and ultimately his violent actions. The downward spiral, how Ted's resentment consumed him. Ted's life spiraled out of control as he grew more resentful of the world around him. His intelligence, once a source of pride, became a tool for justifying his violence. His obsession with the destruction of industrial society consumed him, turning his academic brilliance into a weapon. The evolution of his bombings, the growing lethality of Ted's devices. As Ted's bombings continued, they became more sophisticated. The FBI struggled to keep up with his evolving methods. What started as crude devices became masterfully crafted bombs that left little evidence behind, making it nearly impossible for investigators to pinpoint his identity. Ted's need for recognition, a desire for attention and legacy. Ted didn't just want to destroy. He wanted recognition for his actions. His manifesto was not only a justification for his bombings, but also a desperate plea for the world to understand his message. It was as much about making people listen as it was about causing fear. The FBI's obsession, the Bureau's relentless pursuit. The FBI became obsessed with catching the Unabomber. With no solid leads, the investigation grew into a massive draining effort. Ted's ability to stay ahead of them, combined with his meticulous planning, made him a nearly impossible target. The turning point. The sketch. A breakthrough in the investigation. In 1987, a sketch of a suspect based on a witness account provided the first real lead. However, even with the sketch, the investigation stalled for years. Ted's cleverness and the isolation of his cabin in Montana made it nearly impossible for the FBI to get any closer to him. The role of his brother, a family betrayal. Ted's brother David played a pivotal role in his capture. Despite their strained relationship, David came to suspect that his brother was the Unabomber. After reading Ted's manifesto, he finally alerted the FBI, setting in motion the events that would lead to Ted's arrest. Ted's final confrontation. The FBI closes in. When the FBI finally swooped in on Ted's cabin, they found the evidence they had been searching for. His journals, filled with confessions and coded messages, were key in linking him to the bombings. The discovery marked the end of a manhunt that had lasted nearly 2 decades. The arrest. Ted is finally taken into custody. Ted was arrested in April 1996. The quiet cabin that had been his sanctuary for so many years was now a prison for his dark ideology. Ted's capture was the culmination of years of work, not by the FBI's brilliant investigation, but by a brother's courage to betray family for the greater good. The trial and sentencing, facing justice for his crimes. Ted's trial was a media spectacle. He was charged with the murders of 3 people and the injury of over 20 others. Throughout the trial, Ted remained steadfast, refusing to plead insanity. He wanted the world to know that his actions were driven by his beliefs, not by madness. The mental health debate. Was Ted Kaczynski mentally ill? Despite his actions, there were those who questioned Ted's mental state. His defense team tried to argue that he was insane, but Ted rejected this claim, insisting that his actions were the result of his beliefs, not mental illness. This sparked a debate about whether his actions were a result of his ideas or psychological breakdown. Ted in prison, continuing his ideological fight. In prison, Ted continued to write. He published 2 books and corresponded with many journalists expressing his thoughts on technology and society. His writings revealed a man who was still committed to his beliefs, even as he faced the consequences of his violent acts. The Prisoner's Legacy. Ted's lasting influence on his followers. Ted's time in prison was marked by continued correspondence with admirers and critics alike. His manifesto gained a new life online, with people debating the validity of his ideas. However, the violent means by which he sought to enact change continued to overshadow his message. Ted's influence on extremism, the Unabomber's ideology, lives on. Ted's ideas have been cited by various extremist groups over the years. His anti-industrial views, though, grounded in his personal frustrations, became a rallying cry for those disillusioned with modern society. His manifesto has found a place among other radical ideologies, though Ted himself never wanted to be seen as a martyr. The end of an era. Ted Kaczynski's death and his legacy. Ted Kaczynski died in 2023, leaving behind a legacy of destruction and a controversial philosophical argument. His life, marked by brilliance and violence, serves as a dark reminder of the consequences of unchecked anger and isolation. Though his manifesto continues to be read, the man behind the violence is now gone, leaving only his words to echo through history.